Imagine you are standing on the observation deck of a fleet that is about to die. The deck is dark, lit only by the slow red breathing of a dead star, and through the long window you can see them. Ships, dozens of them, crammed together inside the debris ring like animals huddling against the cold, hull to hull, so close that one bad maneuver would grind two of them into scrap. This is Anchorage 16, the last safe harbor at the edge of contested space, and it is safe only because there is nowhere left to run. Beyond the ring, on the far horizon, something glitters. It is not stars. Stars do not move toward you. The seer are coming, the way they always come, in a wave with no front and no flank and no face, and every captain in that anchorage knows the arithmetic. The seer outnumber the coalition 40-1. You can feel the panic before you can name it. It comes through the shared channels first, a tremor in the voices, then a flood of orders that contradict each other, then the worst sound a packed fleet can make in the dark, which is the sound of engines lighting one by one as captains decide, privately, that they would rather scatter than hold. A fleet that scatters in open space against the seer is a fleet that is harvested in detail. Everyone knows this. They are doing it anyway. And in the middle of that ring, while the stronger ships shudder and the braver species break, there is one cluster of vessels that does not move. The human ships. They sit there in the red light, anchored and still, lights burning low as if they have all the time in the world. I am the one who watched them do it. I am an archivist of the Vire, and I have spent the years since assembling this account for our tribunal, because my people still do not believe what I am about to tell you. The question I was sent to answer was not how the humans survived Anchorage 16. Survival can be luck. The question my people demanded an answer to was harder and stranger than that. Why did the human discipline hold when everyone stronger than them broke? And why, when I finally understood it, did it frighten me more than the seer ever had? To understand what the humans did, you must first understand what my people are, because it is the gap between us that nearly killed me with confusion. The Vire do not feel pain alone. We never have. From the moment we are budded, we are woven into the shared nerve of our cluster, and when one of us is injured, all of us feel the cut. This is not metaphor. It is biology. A Vire who burns its hand makes 10,000 Vire flinch. This is why, in all the long history of my people, we have never once invented punishment. The idea is incoherent to us. You cannot make one individual suffer for a wrong, because suffering is never individual. To punish one Vire is to punish the whole cluster, including the wronged, including the judge. So we govern by consensus and we correct by absorption, and we had assumed for most of our history that every civilized species did the same. Then we met humanity, and we read their records and we recoiled. The galactic archive is full of the things humans had done to one another across their history. Whole institutions built around making a single person hurt for the failures of a group. Punishments designed not merely to correct, but to be witnessed, so that the watching would feel the weight of it. We cataloged these acts under a single heading in our files, and the heading was a word that in your languages means something close to brutality. For a long time, that one word was all my people knew of humans. The cruelest disciplinarians in the known galaxy, the species that punishes its own. We were not eager to share a war with them. We were assigned to one anyway. And so I was sent to Anchorage 16 to record how the monsters fought, and I marked in my opening log that I expected to witness atrocity. I was correct that I would witness things I did not understand. I was wrong about everything else. The first thing I saw was a young human soldier, except a death that was not his. His name was Tomas Vila, and he was 19 of his planet's years, which is barely budded. A defensive screen had failed during a seer probe, and 4 ships had taken damage, and somewhere in the chain of orders that led to that failure was a mistake. By every standard my people would recognize, the mistake belonged to many hands. The sensor crew had been slow. The relay officer above them had been distracted. The pattern that allowed the gap had been approved months earlier by people who were no longer even on the station. The wrong was diffuse, the way wrongs always are. And so I expected what a Vire would expect, which is that the cluster would absorb the error and adjust. Instead, Vila stepped forward, and in front of his assembled unit he said that the screen had been his watch, his responsibility, his failure, and that he would carry it. And his unit did something to him that I logged in horror as an execution. They stripped him of his rank insignia. They assigned him the most dangerous post on the station, the forward listening spur, where the next seer probe would strike first. They made him stand a double rotation alone, in the dark, watching the thing that would kill them all. I marked it in my record as the first human death I had witnessed at Anchorage 16, because I could not imagine a man surviving what they had just done to him. I was wrong. He survived it. He stood his post and his unit grew tighter around him, not crueler, and when his rotation ended they brought him back among them, and the relay officer who had been distracted came to him afterward and said quietly that the failure had been hers as much as his, and Vila said that he knew and that it did not matter because the watch had been his. I did not understand. I corrected my record. First death struck out. I would strike out many more before I was done. I needed to know how the system worked, so I did what archivists do, which is I asked to see the ledger. Every human unit keeps one. Not of supplies, though they keep those too, but of accountability. Who answers for what? It is the most important document on a human warship and the one they guard most carefully, and when I was finally permitted to study it, I found a rule written at the top of it that overturned everything my people believed about how power and pain are supposed to relate. The rule was this: rank does not lower your liability, rank raises it. The higher you stand, the more you answer for, and the harsher the consequence you accept when those beneath you fail, because they failed inside a system you built and commanded. A human private answers for his own watch. A human colonel answers for every watch in her command, including the ones she never saw. This was the precise inversion of how my people, and every species I knew, had always arranged things. We protected our leaders from consequence so that they could lead. The humans aimed consequence directly at theirs. It was, I came to understand, the most dangerous job in their entire structure. To rise among humans was to volunteer to be the one who carries the weight when it all goes wrong. And it goes wrong in war. It always goes wrong. Which meant that every human leader at Anchorage 16 was, in a sense, already standing on a burning ship, holding the line, waiting for the moment the fire would reach them. I did not have to wait long to see that moment, because it arrived on the worst night of the siege, and its name was Colonel Naomi Hale. The seer had found a seam in the debris ring, and an order went out to plug it, and the order was wrong. I will not pretend it was anyone's brilliance that made it wrong. It was wrong in the ordinary way orders are wrong in war, built on a sensor reading that was 3 minutes stale, and by the time anyone understood, 2 human ships had pushed into the seam, and the seam had closed behind them like a mouth. 41 humans died in those 2 ships. I felt nothing, because they were not of my cluster, and I hated myself a little for feeling nothing, and then I turned to watch the human command deck to see who would be blamed. I knew how this went among lesser species. I had seen it on the Allied decks already. The order had passed through 6 hands before it reached the ships, and any of those 6 could be made to carry it. The junior officer who relayed it, the analyst who misread the sensor. There is always a smallest hand to crush. I expected the humans to find theirs. Colonel Hale stood up. The deck went quiet, the particular quiet of people who already know what they are about to watch. And she said in a voice that did not shake that the order had been hers, not relayed by her, hers. She said that the sensor reading had been flagged as old and that she had chosen to trust it because she had wanted the seam closed, and that the choice and its weight belonged to no one in that room but her. She did not look for the smallest hand. She put out her own. And the analyst whose misreading had genuinely contributed, a young man with his face gray with guilt, started to speak, started to take his share, and Hale told him to be silent because the command had been hers, and a thing she had commanded could not be his fault, no matter what his censors had said. What they did to her, I will not soften. By their own law, the commander who loses ships in an error of her own command surrenders her command for the duration of the engagement and serves the rest of the siege as a line soldier under the officer who replaces her. For a human, I would learn, there is no harsher consequence short of death. To be the one who answered, to stand and say mine, and then to be sent down to take orders in the same fight you had been leading an hour before. I logged it again as a death, the death of Colonel Naomi Hale, and again I was wrong because she did not die. She picked up a rifle and she went to the line, and the strangest thing happened, the thing my people still cannot explain. The human fleet did not lose faith in her. It gained faith in the whole. This was the moment I began to understand, and the understanding terrified me. The humans were not held together by fear of punishment. They were held together by the certainty of it, applied upward to the powerful, first and hardest. Every human in that anchorage knew, with absolute conviction, that if their leaders sent them to die through carelessness, those leaders would answer for it before anyone else did. And so they trusted the orders. They trusted them precisely because the person giving them had the most to lose by giving them badly. The brutality my people had catalogued was not aimed downward at the weak to keep them in line. It was aimed upward at the strong to keep them honest. We had read the entire human story backward. And it was not one woman, not one charismatic commander whose force of will held a fleet together. I want to be precise about this, because it would be comforting to believe it was a single great human, the way our stories always feature a single great Vyre. It was not. It was everywhere on that station, in places no commander could reach. I watched a human quartermaster named Dmitry Sokolov discover that his supply manifests had been padded, that a previous officer had logged rations the station did not have, and I watched him refuse to pass the shortfall down to the troops. He answered for it instead. He cut his own allotment first, before anyone below him went hungry, and he stood in front of the assembled supply crew and said the books had been wrong on his watch and the hunger would start at the top. I watched a human physician, Aisha Bello, lose a patient to a treatment she had chosen against the protocol, and I watched her enter it into the record in her own hand, in full, with her name, refusing the easy mercy of calling it an unavoidable death. Nobody made these people do these things. There was no Vyre-style cluster forcing absorption, and no tyrant standing over them with a whip. They simply lived inside a culture where the answer to whose fault was always, reflexively, mine, and I will carry it. And the higher you stood, the louder you were expected to say it. I logged 4 more deaths that week. I struck out all 4. My tribunal, reading my reports, accused me of incompetence. How could I keep mistaking ceremony for execution? But you must understand what I was looking at. To a Vyre, a being who accepts isolated suffering on purpose in front of witnesses is a being who is choosing to die in the only way that matters to us, the way of being cut off from the cluster. I kept watching humans choose it and then simply go on living, carrying the cut, and I had no category for that. My death count became a joke among the human officers, who learned of it somehow and began, gently, to tell me before their accountability rituals that no, archivist, this one also is not a death, you may keep your tally clean. I did not always find it funny, but I kept the count because I came to suspect it was teaching me something my own language could not. The reputation, though. The reputation was its own weapon, and this is the part the seer never understood, and neither, at first, did our allies. Because the galaxy had read humanity the way my people had read them, as the cruel ones, the punishers, the species that does terrible things to its own, every other being at Anchorage 16 treated the human contingent as something to be feared rather than understood. The seer, in their captured communications, referred to the human ships with a word their kind reserves for things that do not break, and they targeted them last, not first, because a creature that punishes itself so savagely was assumed to be impossible to frighten. The allies, for their part, kept their distance, certain that any species that disciplined itself like that would discipline a neighbor worse. The humans were alone inside their reputation, surrounded by beings who had decided what they were without ever once asking. And the humans, I noticed, did nothing to correct the misunderstanding. They had learned, somewhere in their long, bloody history, that being misjudged as monstrous by your enemies is not always a thing worth fixing. It was our allies' attempt to copy the humans that finally proved what the humans had, because copying it is how you discover you cannot. By the second month, the panic in the rest of the fleet had grown unbearable, and the Allied commands, watching the human cluster hold while their own crews trembled, decided that the answer was discipline. They had seen that humans punished and that humans held, and they drew the obvious and wrong conclusion, which was that the punishing caused the holding. So they began to punish. The Choved command flogged the crews who fled their posts. The Aran command stripped rations from the panicked. They aimed their new cruelty downward, at the frightened and the weak, the way every species in galactic history had always aimed it, and they waited for their fleets to harden into something like the human one. Their fleets did not harden, their fleets shattered, because they had copied the act and missed the engine entirely. When you punish downward, you teach the weak that the strong are dangerous, and a crew that fears its own officers will run twice as fast, once from the enemy and once from its own command deck. The Choved had 3 full mutinies in a single week. The Aran lost a destroyer when its terrified crew refused an order they were sure would be used against them. The discipline that the Allies built on fear did exactly what fear does. It scattered them faster. And the humans watched this happen and did not gloat, which I found notable, because they understood something the Allies could not be told and had to learn by failing. You cannot fake chosen accountability. You cannot impose from above the thing whose entire power comes from the powerful accepting it first. The moment a leader exempts himself, the whole structure inverts, and you are left with nothing but a frightened crowd and a man with a whip, which is the weakest formation in the history of war, no matter how strong it looks from the outside. And then came the night that I will carry in my own record until my cluster reabsorbs me. The night Colonel Naomi Hale paid the harshest price of all. The seer had broken the ring. There is no gentle way to say it. The seam she had failed to close 2 months before had been a small wound. This was the artery. The swarm was inside the anchorage among the packed ships, and the fleet was going to die in the next hour unless someone closed the breach. And the only way to close it was to take a ship into the breach and hold it there, engines burning against the swarm, a body in a doorway. It was a fire ship in everything but name. A vessel sent to be destroyed so the rest could live. And it required a crew that would not leave, because the breach would only stay closed as long as the ship stayed in it, which meant the crew would burn with it. Hale had been a line soldier for 2 months. By their law she had no command, no rank, no right to give an order. She gave one anyway, and it was the only kind of order their law could not forbid, because it was an order she gave only to herself. She took the breached ship. She who had answered for 41 deaths already, who had been broken down to the line and had served there without complaint, walked back up onto a command deck for the last time and took the most dangerous post on the most dangerous night, not because anyone made her, and not because her rank required it, for she had no rank, but because the rule that had governed her whole life did not stop applying simply because the system had set her down. The weight had been hers once. She decided it was still hers. She flew the ship into the breach, and she held it there with her engines screaming, a single human body in the doorway of a dying fleet, and the swarm broke against her and could not get past. The humans got the fleet out through the gap she made. Every ship that scattered lived. Every ship that held lived. The whole arithmetic of Anchorage 16, 40-1, was undone in a single hour because one demoted soldier decided that answering for things was not a job you could be relieved of. I logged it as a death, and this time, finally, I was not wrong. Naomi Hale did not stand back up. The galaxy that had filed humanity under brutality learned, in that hour, what the word had actually meant all along. Not that humans were willing to make others suffer. That a human leader, given the chance to send someone else into the fire, would so reliably go herself that her own people had built an entire civilization on the certainty of it. I owe you the honest cost, because my tribunal demanded it, and because a thing this strange should not be made to sound like magic. It is not magic. It is expensive beyond what most species could pay. A culture that aims consequence upward burns through its best people. The humans I studied did not live easy lives. To rise among them was to accept that your reward for competence was greater and greater liability, until eventually a day came, as it came for Naomi Hale, when the weight you had agreed to carry simply killed you. Not every human bore it well. I saw officers crack under the certainty of it, saw some flee command precisely to escape the answering, saw the system strain in 100 places where a frightened or selfish individual tried to wriggle out from under the rule. It held at Anchorage 16 because enough humans in enough of the critical places chose to honor it. It would not hold everywhere or always. It is not a machine. It is a promise that a society makes to itself and then has to keep, person by person, every single day, with no enforcement possible except the watching of one's peers. The humans had simply decided, somewhere in their brutal and bloody past, that the watching was enough, and had built a 1,000-year habit of making it true. My people did not adopt it gladly. I will not pretend we were transformed in a season. The Vire are slow, and we are afraid of pain in a way it is hard to explain to a species that feels it one body at a time. But the coalition that came out of that war was not the coalition that went in. Slowly, reluctantly, over years, the institutions of a dozen species began to do the thing we had watched the humans do, which was to aim the heaviest consequence at the highest rank. Our own clusters began, for the first time in our history, to let a leader stand apart and answer alone for a choice, a thing that had been literally unthinkable to us before. And it hurt us in ways our biology had no defense against, and we did it anyway because we had seen what it built. We had seen a fleet hold when fear said run. We learned the lesson backward from the one our archives had taught us. The danger had never been that humans punished. The danger and the gift was the direction they aimed it. So let me end where the records never do, which is with the ones whose names I never learned. History will remember Naomi Hale, and it should, but Naomi Hale was not rare among her people. That is the thing I most want my tribunal to understand. For every commander whose sacrifice was witnessed by a fleet, there were 10,000 humans on that station who did the same small thing in the dark where no archive recorded it. The watch officer who said mine over a failure no one would ever have traced to her. The sergeant who took the shortfall so his squad ate. The countless humans who, given the universal and ancient option to find a smaller hand to crush, reached out instead and crushed their own. They are not in my account because I never saw them. They are the reason the account exists at all. I have closed my death tally now. The final number is not the one I expected when I began. I struck out so many false deaths, so many men and women I was certain I had watched die, who only turned out to be carrying something I did not have the language to see, that I have come to believe my error was the most honest record I kept. Because every time I mistook their accountability for an execution, I was, in a clumsy Vire way, telling the truth. Each of those humans was choosing to die a little, in the only way a Vire understands death, cutting themselves off from the comfort of shared blame, standing alone in the witness dark, and saying the wrong was theirs. They simply kept getting back up. That was the part I could not have predicted, and it is the part I have spent these years trying to explain to a people who feel everything together, and so can never quite imagine the courage it takes to feel something alone. The galaxy feared humanity for its cruelty. It had the records to prove it, and so did I, but we were all reading it backward, every one of us, my cluster included. What we should have feared, and what I have finally learned to envy, is so simple that my people still refuse to write it in the archive without an argument. When everything went wrong at Anchorage 16, when the order was bad and the ships were lost and the fleet began to break, The human in command did not look for someone smaller to blame. She bled first. That is the whole of it. That is the brutal discipline the galaxy so feared, the punishment that built the only fleet that did not scatter. It was never the whip. It was a leader, standing up in the red light of a dying star, putting out her own hand before anyone could put out a weaker one, and saying the word my people had no concept for until the humans taught it to us. Mine.